Hey, it's Rod Yates. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey and the lessons they've learned. And my special guest today is Dropkick Murphys founder and co-vocalist Ken Casey. Dropkick Murphys have just released their new album, This Machine Still Kills Fascists. As you can probably tell from the title, the record is something of a tribute to Woody Guthrie and features a collection of Woody's unpublished lyrics set to music. The seeds of the project were sown some years ago when the band befriended Woody's daughter Nora, whose son was a fan of the Dropkick Murphys and saw in the band a group of kindred spirits who embodied Woody's everyman working class ethic. We talk about that whole journey in this interview, as well as going deep into Ken's life and career with the Dropkick Murphys, from fighting Nazis at punk shows to the DIY spirit that's driven them from the day they formed in Quincy, Massachusetts in 1996. But we started by talking about the Dropkick Murphys' latest album, This Machine Still Kills Fascists. I know you've been inspired by Woody Guthrie before in covering Gonna Be a Blackout Tonight on Blackout, and his lyrics inspired and helped shape I'm Shipping Up to Boston. But when did you first become aware of Woody Guthrie?
You know, I often say I remember, like, as a young kid in Catholic school, I don't know if it was first or second grade, you were kind of taught, like, this land is your land, like, as if it was, like, the people's national anthem, you know, and not the governments or the, you know, people in power. So I always had this knowledge of him as, like, you know, the representative of us, you know. And then obviously as I grew into my teens and developed my own musical tastes and saw what an influence he was on my influences, like Bruce Springsteen, Joe Strummer, I started to kind of say, oh, okay, yeah, now he's actually even cooler, and really kind of looked at him as like the original punk rocker in a way, you know?
Yeah. When did you strike up a relationship with his daughter, Nora?
Nora reached out to us in about the year 2000. Her son, Cole, who was a teenager at the time, was, you know, Dropkick Murphys fan, and, you know, basically said, Mom, I think these guys and, you know, Grandpa or whatever had the kind of a kindred spirits. And so when Nora reached out, we thought it was really cool, and it was an awesome opportunity. The very first time I went down to the archives in 2000, it was before everything was put on microfilm or computer, so I was actually holding the pieces of paper he wrote the songs on. I had to be in a special room with special gloves, but you know, you're holding the pieces of paper, and he would always date when he wrote the song, and usually a little anecdote about what was on his mind or where he was when he wrote it. So, you know, you just knew you were holding such a valuable piece of history. So that experience hit me pretty deeply to know. I already knew what an honor it was, but when you actually held the physical copy of the paper, it was that much more of an inspiration. And so, you know, throughout our career, we've really kept touring and releasing album after album. So it was always this like, oh, Nora, the goal is to do a full album someday. And I'm sure if we did it back when we first set out to do it, it would have probably been very much like a regular Dropkick Murphys record. And 26 years into the career, we finally get around to doing it. And it made it, we hit a stride and a time where we said, now let's do this stripped down. Let's do something different. And I'm really glad we did. And I'm really glad we stuck to our guns to do it full, because there was times when we were like, well, maybe we'll put a little electric on it, you know, and it would have just seeped back. And we really, you know, made a point to not put electric on it and not even use amps, just, you know, up to the mics and play. And it really forced us to come outside of our comfort zone, really, because we didn't want this to sound like a wimpy, mellow album. We wanted it to be a kick in the balls, and it takes a little more craft to do that when you don't have loud guitars, you know? So I felt like it made us a better band. And, you know, plus, you know, with Woody's unpublished lyrics being kind of unveiled for the first time, you want people to hear him, man. You want to be saying, what was he saying? That Marshall stack was, you know? Yeah, so it was a challenge. It was fun. It was inspiring. It was kind of just what we needed to do at this point in our career, you know?
How big a responsibility did you feel, given that these lyrics were unpublished, but B, knowing Woody's place in American and musical history? How much of a responsibility did you feel to do these lyrics justice?
A great amount of responsibility for sure, but Nora has shown us an amazing amount of respect, and she's just really trusted us with the process. And I would have expected and understood if she hovered over us the whole way. But she really kind of said that, a ways into it, like, you get my father. And I appreciate that. And knowing that she thought that of us made us feel like we didn't have to, you know what I mean? That we could just like stop worrying and just do it and push the boundaries. And even with calling the album, in this climate, this machine still kills fascists. It was like, oh, you sure you want to say that? She didn't say that, but some other people did. I said, fuck yeah, we do, and, but she also says, like, sometimes, as people talk about him as such a great songwriter, she wishes his rebellious lack of fear of confronting situations like that needs to be represented in his legacy as well. So I think she thinks that we do that,
Were there parallels between what you were reading in his lyrics now with what's happening in the world today? Could you align them with what's going on?
Shit, yeah, way too many. And I'm sure, any songwriter would be thrilled to say, oh, my lyrics are still relevant 70, 80 years later. But in this instance, in some of these songs, you might say, oh, shit, I wish it wasn't quite so relevant. But it really felt like time to, everything from corporate greed and, the new kind of gig economy and how workers, trade unions in America have been almost vilified, where it's pitted crazy stuff where, like, other working class think that, like, they're being greedy, and it doesn't make sense. It should be about unity. And even like, Starbucks trying to unionize now, and that is the new frontier. You know what I mean? And it's not maybe in the building trades as much as it needs to be in these new places where, the CEOs of these companies are making absurd amounts of money. And so like that new world developing, like, we need to speak up on the importance of fair treatment for workers for this new generation of people who might not have even ever been raised in union households like we were, and so like it's a new message to them. And and just obviously with the rise of authoritarianism and people's acceptance of it, and just the division and stuff. And I just think it's a time when we really need to stand up and speak up, because in America, it's like, as you saw from January 6th, it's the right that wants to fight and pick up arms and do this. And a lot of the people, like center left people, are just like, I just want to live my life. And this is crazy. And they assume that good will win out over evil. But like, if nobody speaks up and everyone just kind of says, oh, this will pass, we could lose our democracy. So, yeah, we feel like, do I think that a Dropkick Murphys album or, Woody Guthrie lyrics is going to change everybody's mind? Hell no. But, they're pretty loud on the right about their feelings. And when I say they, I'm talking about people I know in my life, people that were raised in, pro-union, working class households that have now, in the last 5-6 years, bought into this crazy conspiracy theories and hate and division. And so like maybe we just need to be that reminder of sanity, Listen, I'm going to, I know for a fact that like Dropkick Murphys making this album is, probably going to cost us some fans, but like, I don't care,
You really think that?
Yeah, I do, because I think in some places and, have somewhat of a diverse following, but for the most part, Celtic Irish music, it's a white working class audience. And that is the majority of the people that Donald Trump has duped to change their stripes. You know what I mean? Mm. So part of what used to be our core fan base is now the farthest to the other side. And,
wow.
So I feel like it's it's even more important to like speak up and represent. Hey, remember how we used to be over here, you know? So anyway, that's how I see it. You know, things like, I found this one comment sums up a lot of people, you know, this machine still kills fascists. And the guy commented, so I suppose you like inflation and high gas prices. And I said, so is that what it's come to? It's either you like the Democrats and you love inflation, or you have to be a fascist. It's, you know, which is basically someone admitting they're a fascist, you know. If the word fascism triggers you, then seriously take a look in the mirror, you know. And I almost feel like some people don't even realize, you know, that they don't even realize in a way that they've slipped from, you know, what they would in their mind consider a conservative to be the person, you know, something that their grandfathers fought against, you know. And
right.
Anyway,
I guess that's, you know, what you were talking about earlier, the fact that if you had done this, say, 10 years earlier, it would have been loud and it would have been big amps, but also perhaps the world wouldn't have been in the state that it currently is. So perhaps this may not have resonated in the same way that you're thinking that it will resonate, or may not be as needed as it is needed now.
Yeah, I mean, listen, our goal is not to have to go out and put ourselves in controversial situations and you know, potentially, you know, it's in some points in our career even been, because we've always kind of been on, you know, with the punk rock kind of world, there's always been that right-wing Nazi fringe, and we've always stood up to it. And so throughout our career, we've kind of dealt with that. And who the hell wants to deal with that? You'd rather just go play music. But if it's there, you got to deal with it, right? Yeah, 10 years ago, this would have just probably been a little bit more of a subtle album. Now it maybe does seem more important, but I think every time you go in to make an album, there has to be an inspiration behind it. There has to be something that, you know, if you want to make a good album, it shouldn't be just like, oh, hey guys, it's time to make an album. It's probably not going to be your best album if that's how you feel about it. And I feel like every time we've made an album, I mean, obviously different motivations. It might not be politics or anything like that, but it might just be some, you know, like, you know, a couple albums ago, we had like crazy, tremendous amount of opioid, you know, heroin overdoses in our lives. And, you know, it just made you want to write. It made you want to get it out. It made, you know, so like, you know, and then the pandemic, did an album in the pandemic, and we were like, we want to do something that's upbeat and uplifting. You know, we're all stuck in our fucking basements. This sucks. No one wants to, like, you know, write a song about being locked down. So that album, we really thought back about how much music played a part in our lives. Like, because I don't know about you, but for me, I listened to so much more music during the pandemic because, you know, my old records that hadn't seen the light of day, suddenly I had time to take them out and slow down and really experience things in a different way. And, you know, and when I did listen to music, it wasn't in the background, it was in the foreground. And that had a big impact. So, you know, like I said, those are all different types of motivations, but they were big motivations, you know.
One of the songs on the record, Dig a Hole, features you, I guess, duetting with Woody. I think some of his Smithsonian Folkways recordings. And his grandson, Cole, who you mentioned earlier, he plays dobro and sings backups on the song, I believe. What was that like for you, that being in the studio and hearing Woody's voice and singing almost, not along with it, but you're singing almost in response to it at certain points?
It made the hair on the back of our neck stand up. You know, I'd always loved that recording. It's a pretty rare recording. And I said, what if we gave Woody a backing band? You know, originally it was just going to be a bonus track because technically it is a released song, but it's a very rare song. And so it didn't fit the mold per se of the project of unreleased stuff. But we said, let's put some music behind it. You know, he's, for the most of the song, he's just riding on a D. It's just one note. So we just kind of put a little bit of music behind it. And then, you know, this is the beauty of a solo artist. They can be on their own, you know, if it's a guy and his guitar. So his timing on his delivery of how long he holds notes and goes to the next word is all over the place. So when we're trying to sing backups along with him, we're like, whoa, when's he going? It was pretty cool. We made a little documentary of the whole thing, and there was some good scenes of me trying to follow Woody around, but then his son and his grandson Cole doing background. Well, at one point we were all doing background vocals together, and just looking over to the side and saying, man, this guy's a grown man now, and they're like, he's the reason why we're having this opportunity. And he never even got to meet his grandfather. He was dead before he was born. And it just had this almost, eerie's not the right word, you know what I mean? But it was just such a positive thing, but it was just surreal, that we were standing in a room singing along in headphones with Woody, and his grandson was right beside me. It was just wild. And so we're so appreciative of the whole experience, not just the opportunity to make the music and the record, but just the little stuff, to have access to look through and choose these lyrics, and have the trust of the family. And yeah, it's things like that that'll go down in the memory banks of our career, and be stuff that is definitely at the top of the list,
Yeah, nice. I know that when you play live, you've stepped away from playing bass and handling co-vocal duties with Al. Was that the case on this record as well, or did you play bass on the album?
I didn't know. Kevin, longtime employee / old buddy Kevin, Kevin Rowe, who's been with us forever. He had been, like a baseball team has a utility player. We can play and Kevin has filled in for almost every position. I mean, he's a savant musically, so someone has a funeral to go home to. Oh, Kevin will play the banjo. Someone has to, he's played everything. So we really were kind of thrilled to be able to give Kevin that role. So I don't really try to now step back and say, but I'll play this one, Kevin. You know what I mean? So no, it's his role now, for better or worse. It's definitely for better. Trust me. He's a really good musician. And
when you made that decision to step away from the bass, because I understand it was following neck surgery that you'd had after for an old accident while you were laboring, and when you emerged from the surgery, your fingers or your hands were numb, so you couldn't actually play the bass for that period. Did you expect? Was there a sense that could be long term? Because I understand you've got the feeling back now, but was there a worry that may never return?
No. It was actually the numbness was before the surgery, and which led me to have to do it. And then after the surgery, during the healing process, I just couldn't have the weight of the instrument over me. So, and then there was rehab and all that. And it did take me a while to get the feeling back in my fingers. And during that period, my role in the band, or just whatever I am as a person or whatever, would be like the conduit to the people, staying afterwards to talk to them. And I just felt like I can get to the people more, and so we all just kind of looked at ourselves, and Al and I were having fun at the time. Al's father had just passed, and he was kind of not really up for putting the face on, and I would try to make him laugh, and it just kind of felt like, oh, this is cool. So so then Kevin stepped in, and I'm like, man, damn, the band sounds better than it ever has because I'm not playing bass, and so that's how it kind of went in that direction. And I was always, I always considered my strengths in the band, like the songwriting side of it, not so much especially the studio performance side of it. So, I think all around we're a better band with this dynamic,
Is it true? I think there's the story that when you started playing bass, and you starting to play bass coincides with the birth of the Dropkick Murphys, and you would actually have the notes taped on the back of your fretboard, I guess, so that you could see what to play. Was that the case?
Yeah, and masking tape. And because the band started on a bet on 3 weeks notice. So if you only have 3 weeks to learn to play an instrument, you got to cut some corners. But as many things in life, if you don't learn the proper way and you have a crutch, well, then we just kept touring, and I'm saying, man, this tape, I don't think I'll ever be able to take this tape off. And one night we were going on stage somewhere, and I think we were opening for the Mighty Mighty Bosstones at the time when they had their pretty big record in 1997. So playing like a college arena, maybe like a 5,000 seater. And we were the first band on and the stage was dark. And I said to one of the stagehands, hey, can you turn up the lights? I need to be able to read these notes. And, most of the guys that work on stages are like musicians themselves. And this guy nearly coughed up a lung and he called all the other stagehands over. Look at this fucking kid. He's got the fucking notes taped on his bass. And instead of being ashamed, I was like, hey, whatever. I just, a month ago, I wasn't even playing, So, it was a lot. With Dropkick Murphys never took ourselves too serious, but we hit the ground running. And sometimes when you're running, you don't have time to stop and take lessons. How am I going to take a lesson? I'm in this city here. And, but the darkness motivated me to get rid of the tape because I realized as you get into these bigger venues, sometimes it's dark when you go on stage. I said, I'm going to have to get glow in the dark tape.
Where did that self-confidence come from, that ability to just go, I don't care that these stagehands are laughing at me, I'm just going to go out and do this?
I mean, the beauty is that like when we started the band, I was already in my mid-20s and I had lived some hard life, man, before that and certain things. And I had a lot of experiences in life where I was like, this is just fucking music. Who gives a shit? We're having a laugh. We weren't even trying to make a career out of it. I was like, whatever. Yeah, and we just never took ourselves too serious, and we had fairly low expectations, which is really the key to happiness in life. Very low expectations, and but I always felt like that in a weird way it endeared people to us too, because it was almost like I don't know if you know the movie The Bad News Bears, about that
right.
The teen there. You're kind of like, man, I'm rooting for these guys because they don't know what they're doing. But there was something about that people sensed that we were just going for it, but at the same time, not a clue. It was all, we did everything ourselves, managers, and, we were releasing our own records, and we were just finding our way through it, so.
Just for people who are listening to give context to that, what you just mentioned there about that 3-week bet. So you were attending bar at Symphony Hall and one of your co-workers had a band and they bet you that you couldn't get a band together within 3 weeks to support them at their next gig. I think it was a $20 bet.
30.
And you took that bet? 30, okay.
Never paid me.
But you took that bet and you put the band together, and so the Dropkick Murphys were born. But I know that music had been important to you prior to that point, and you'd definitely been involved in the hardcore scene around Boston. Why do you think you hadn't picked up or at least attempted to learn an instrument prior to that point?
Yeah, I was just busy trying to friggin' survive, and I was involved in the famous club here was called the Rat, which was like our version of CBGB's. And I booked a lot of, all ages shows there. And basically the Rat would say, hey, we do what we do at night. If you want the room in the daytime for an all ages, no alcohol show, like it's yours, just give us a cut, So we would be bringing in bands that we love from all over the country. And a lot of my friends' bands, like the local bands, the scene in the mid-90s in Boston, the local bands were drawing more than a lot of the national acts. And Dropkicks got started, it was the same thing. So we were able to show such a good time to all these touring bands and go, holy shit, we just went to Boston and played to 700 people on a Saturday afternoon, and Dropkick Murphys played and gave us all the money, because we still had our jobs and we were just doing it for a laugh. And so that band would owe us a show in their city. And when we came there, no one even knew us, but it developed this like pride in your scene thing. And people would be like, oh shit, we can't have Dropkicks come to Pittsburgh and play to 50 people. We got to get people in there. So they would in turn be talking us up like we were the second coming of the Clash. We weren't, but they wanted to get people there, So that's kind of how we got going and built the whole thing. And, so I full credit to the strength of the mid-90s Boston punk rock scene.
And why hardcore for you, though? Why was it that music that you think you gravitated towards?
Well, my first music that I got into and was all late 70s British punk stuff, but American hardcore was what was playing all the time. That's what you'd see live, and I loved the energy and the just the intensity of it. And it was also though the punk rock ethics of like, we're all in this together, down to earth, that didn't come from British punk. That came from American hardcore. You know, when I later would meet most of my musical idols from England, I realized, holy shit, these guys all thought they were going to be the next Who, and they're bullshit that they weren't. You know what I mean? And they're jaded forever. And so a lot of those guys, a lot of them have been great, and a lot of them are still nice guys, and I love the music, but you can see that, like, they kind of felt like the rug got pulled out from under them, you know, like career-wise and it's always the record label's fault and, you know, all that stuff.
Right.
So, I mean, all that stuff, you know, punk and hardcore, to me, it's, as much as it can be so different, melodically wise, it's all the same thing. It's, you know, getting the blood pumping, you know.
But as a kid growing up in Boston, what was it about these British bands like Coxsparrer and The Business and The Clash? Like, why did they speak to you, do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's just sometimes, like, as much as, like, okay, so sometimes when you can identify with something exactly, like your peers, that hits you because it's like, yeah, you're speaking to me. But then there's also something about the romance of, like, you know, the something far away seems so, like, intriguing, you know, like, oh man, they're singing about football and fighting on the terraces, you know. Yeah, me and my friends fight with guys from other parks and this, but, like, I've never been to a soccer game and nor do I want to, but they were passionate about it, right? You know what I mean? And sometimes that, you know, like, and then, you know, bands like the Pogues and Shane MacGowan, I think that's why he's such a great writer, is he can, you know, when he sings, you know, Fairy Tale in New York, I think half of Ireland was thinking, oh, I got to go to New York. And, you know, or whether the song's making you think, you know, just drawing pictures of London and other places in the world that he made you want to go there or want to know more about it, you know.
Yeah. Rum Sodomy and the Lash was an important Pogues record for you. I think you've said it was the record that made some of the music, the Irish music your grandparents or your parents were listening to. It kind of brought that into your world.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you'd met some of your idols before, and I think you've toured with Shane, or at least played with Shane. What was that like for you meeting Shane?
Shane's an interesting cat, man. Shane sang on our record in 2001, and he did it in New York. That was interesting. 2 years later, after he did it, I got a call I was on tour, and I got a call from a bar in Boston, and someone said, hey, I'm here with Shane, and he wants to talk to you. And he gets on the phone. Do you still want me to sing on that record? And I said, wait, you did sing on that record 2 years ago. And he's like, oh, okay. So, you know, he was not in the best state of mind. And then in 2005, we did one of those Christmas time Pogues, you know, UK Ireland tours, and, you know, doing arenas. And every night, it'd be the band in their suits ready to go, standing by the door. And where is Shane? And we'd just be like, you know, little kids in the candy store just watching the dynamic of, like, holy shit, the band has to, you know, watch this. And then I remember on the back of the stage, Shane would have a little tent, you know, a little camping tent, but small. And he'd have a table in there with a light, so he could do what Shane might do in between songs when he takes a break. The only thing is, when he turned the light on, his silhouette, you could see whatever he was doing in there. So it wasn't the most thought through plan, I guess. But I mean, you know, you can't take, I mean, that influence was everything, you know. And I've had some, yeah, speaking of idols with that one, I remember there was this festival, one of our biggest shows at the time, I think it was 96 or 97, and there was this big Guinness Flaw Festival, and it was, the main stage was Van Morrison and Elvis Costello, and the side stage was Shane and the Popes and Dropkick Murphys. So I bring all my old singles, all my old Elvis singles, and Rum Sodomy and the Lash. And I see Elvis was married to Kate O'Riordan from the Pogues at the time, you know, who used to be in the Pogues. And I see Elvis, and I'm having him sign my singles and Rum Sodomy and the Lash, and I have him, and then Kate's standing right there. So I said, geez, will you sign Pogue singles? And I had the very first ever Pogue Mahone single, and it's, you know. And then I take them all to Shane to sign later, and he sees that Kate O'Riordan's on it, and he looks at it in disgust and writes, "To Ken, you fucking wanker." And to this day, it's my most prized possession. You know what I mean? Because like, it's so fitting to have Shane MacGowan write you wanker. So yeah, I'm honored. But he didn't like the Cato Rid and beat him to the punch. You know. So I think there might have been a bad dynamic there at some point. You know.
I love that you're also still a fan enough to do that, to not think I'm too cool, to actually be a fan and get your stuff signed.
Yeah, well, to keep in mind, that was 1997. I don't know if I do it now, but our guitar player, Tim, one time, we were on tour maybe 10 years ago, and the Pixies were doing one of their first kind of big reunion things and doing all the, headlining all the European festivals, and we're all sitting out on a picnic table, and there goes, what's her name?
Kim Deal.
Kim Deal. So Kim Deal's walking by, and Tim makes the mistake of going in for a photo as we're all watching, and he goes up and we see her talking, and he's asking her, and then she just shakes her head. He walks away with his head down. She looked like she just got out of bed. She probably did. You know how women are sometimes if they don't have the makeup on, or Tim is if his hair's not combed. But yeah, so he heard about that for the next 5 years. So you gotta weigh that rejection factor into it too.
It was the last question about some of these early influences, but it was the business. Were they the first band to actually take you out on the road for a proper tour?
Yeah, they were, and they really were. They were great to us, man. They were just, we're still, Mickey Fitz, rest in peace, was great to us. But Steve and Mickey Drummer, they were just, they were what we hoped those bands would be like. You know what I mean? And and it was a comedy of errors, because like, hey, listen, they're veterans, but they hadn't, it's not like when the business over and tour, it's not like they got tour managers and this and that. It was the two of us, following each other around in two vans, getting lost all over the place, praying practical jokes on each other. And it was just, it's what you think about, like, the fun part of touring should be like for a band. And it was also new. That was like the epitome of just fun, but also crazy. And I mean, that was a crazy tour. There was some shit went down on that tour as well, like at shows and stuff. And it was like exciting and just crazy. It was a wild tour.
What happened at those shows?
Actually, a Nazi got beat to death at one show outside the show, which obviously you don't want to see anyone get killed at a show. And then there was another show we were booking on our own, and we were advancing the show, and we were playing. I'm calling this guy, and we were playing at some clubhouse, and great. Keep in mind, this is before the internet and everything, and we're playing at some clubhouse, and I'm calling the guy, and he's saying, we have go-karts, and we're going to have cookout. It's going to be the best day ever. I'm going, this guy seems like such a nice guy. And then we start getting letters in the mail that people are sending home, and then we're getting phone calls that it's a white power clubhouse. We had no idea. Us in the business canceled off the show, and they still had the show and didn't tell. They had Nazi bands opening, and they never told the fans that we weren't playing. So kids were paying their money coming in, and then they see the opening band and go, what the fuck is this? And then they say, where is Dropkick's in the business? And they say, they canceled, and they say, we want our money back. And they say, no one's, and they stabbed a fan to death at that show. So it was, yeah. So my point is, I don't want to focus on the negatives, but two people did lose their life on that tour. And at the same time, it was the most wholesome, fun experience. You know what I mean? So it was like, there was a lot going on. And, we're still, Steve Will, as a matter of fact, the 2020, my daughter came over. She's now going into her junior year in college, my oldest child, but she came over her senior year of high school. We were ending our tour, and the last show was London, February 2020, right before the pandemic shut down. And here's Steve from the business that I share so much history with and everything. And my daughter was 18 at the time, and he bought her first Guinness, and I'm like, this is like, I didn't have a child when we toured with him, and now here he is, in his hometown buying her first Guinness. And so it's just, it's cool to just, it's also very cool to stay friends with all those guys. Like, we're very close with the Coxsparrow guys, and just to have that connection over all those years and still maintain those friendships with bands that really did mean something to how you shaped your musical, attitude towards the world.
We'll be back with more from Ken after this break. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Ken Casey. You mentioned earlier that growing up, you'd had some sort of rough times, and you've spoken in the past about losing your father. I think you were around about 7 or 8 after he took his own life. At what age do you think you were able to get perspective on how that impacted you?
I think people react differently to tragedy, and I know for me, it's just, especially if something like that happens as you're a young male and you have somewhat bad influences around you on the outskirts, and you can go to that, and you can go to anger, and you can go to alcohol and drugs, and never really feeling the feelings. And that's what I did for my whole young adulthood into teen years. And so I think it had a huge impact on me. And music was an escape, but also music was part and parcel with how I was feeling a lot of times, like in my anger and stuff. So, yeah, I don't think back about any of those times, like, because everybody has tragedy in their life, but it's how you handle it. And I didn't handle it very well in retrospect, but what do you know when you're that age anyway, so.
Yeah, you've spoken about how important your grandfather was as, I guess, a bit of a guiding hand. And I think the song Boys on the Docks was a tribute to him. And it's got that line, "This man so humble, this man so brave, a legend to many, he fought to his grave." Was that written about your grandfather?
Yeah, because he was a no bullshit guy. He was soft spoken at times, but man, when you didn't fuck with him either, and I had that respect for how he carried himself, and he was the only person in my life that could get my attention, you know what I mean? And where police or anyone else, my poor mother, whoever couldn't, but he could, and thank God he's probably the reason why I am still here,
What was it like for your grandmother, you think, to hear that song? What did that song mean to her?
Yeah, that's been one of the best parts of the band. My grandmother passed 2 or 3 years before the pandemic. The pandemic has thrown my time frames off with everything. But my grandmother, Peg Kelly, was around for the majority of the band's career, and she's been to many shows where the crowd was singing along to that song, or when I've actually brought her out and said the song's about her husband, and she's cried on stage during it, you know what I mean? And I don't care what anybody says, I would take that over playing stadiums, you know what I mean? Having to have that connection. The uniqueness of what Dropkick Murphys does in that, because of the folk side and the history, and we've been able to have everyone from my grandmother, to my daughter, when she was 7 years old, was the first time she Irish step danced with her school on stage at St. Patrick's Day during one of our songs. And, to be able to have that age range of, at the time when she was 7, my grandmother was probably 80, you know what I mean? And it's like pretty rare for a band to be able to have that at the same show, or at least enjoying it at the same show. So I think that my grandfather's memory living on through that song, and my grandmother being able to take part of it, is one of my favorite things about Dropkick Murphys.
Did it give you, because I've seen you talk about the fact that for a while, and I'm not sure if you still feel like this, but for a while you sort of felt like you were doing something wrong being in a band. I'm not sure whether that was because it felt frivolous or compared to, I guess, working 9 to 5. But events like that, being able to know that you're writing songs like that and it's impacting your family like that, does that go any way to ease that sort of sense, that feeling?
Yeah, 100%. I've come full circle with that feeling too. And I think like that's kind of why we started our charity foundation, just to try to offset, being an artist of any form, I feel like has to have some selfishness to it. But back when we were still really hung up on the fact, because we were all kind of raised in that same way of like, oh, we're in a band. Even though it was a successful band, we were like, we're such slackers, So we used to practice at 7 a.m. And at the time, we were in this big rehearsal complex with all of these other bands. And I don't know if it's the same way down there, but generally every big rehearsal complex has that one guy. He's like the manager, but really he's just some semi-homeless guy that they give like a closet to live in. But that guy would always come out and be like, in all my years around rock and roll, I've never seen a band who the fuck practices at 7 a.m., And we just say it makes us feel like we have a real job. The guy would just be like, what?
How long did you do that for?
Oh, years, yeah. We don't do that anymore. Yeah, now we're up at the crack of 10. It had its benefits back then, though, because no one else was practicing. When you're in those little rooms and there's rooms next to you and you come up with a riff and then all of a sudden the band in the room beside you plays the same riff, you're like, wait, what? They just stole our riff. So it definitely, or other times we'd be writing and practicing acoustic and we'd be just about to start and all of a sudden the metal band would beside and drown you out, So there was other reasons why we elected to practice at 7 a.m. too, but mainly so we'd feel legitimate.
Right. The Rats, you mentioned earlier the Ratskeller, the Rat, which is, I guess, your equivalent to CBGBs. And I understand that was really important to the band because it gave you a chance to build a fan base. And you would do things like, in those early days, you would press your own 7 inches and you do your own catalogs with T-shirt designs that people could order. That DIY spirit, where did that come from? Was it from the hardcore scene? Was it from your upbringing in working communities? Where do you think it came from?
A little of both, but it's also just a matter of no one else is offering to do it. So if you want to do it, you got to do it, right? And so we'd press our own singles and we'd, mail order them to people. We'd take out ads in Maximum Rock and Roll or other magazines or they'd get a good review and people would mail order for it. And then we'd print our T-shirts and we'd put in a catalog. And the catalog was just a regular 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that I folded over and I would draw like stick figure style, the T-shirt and the design. And I'm not a good artist. And it had my home phone number, to call or it literally looked like a 3-year-old child drew it. And I sometimes think that people bought the T-shirts because they kind of didn't, is this a joke? Like almost a sympathy for us. But, you didn't have computers to lay this stuff out. It was either that or you go down to the copy store and cut and paste, but all that stuff, making flyers, all that stuff in the old days was so fun. It was like arts and crafts, so, but I used to love making flyers for the shows but yeah, those times have changed. The internet ruined all the fun. But on the same token, you didn't have to wait for someone, okay, I'm going to send this guy the single. In 3 weeks, he's going to get it. And he might go get a money order and mail it back. And in 3 more weeks, I'll get it and I'll send him the T-shirt. However, there was something to be said for that. I think when fans went to that length to get stuff from you and write letters, fans stay with you more when they there was a bond created. Like people their minds would be blown that we used to write all our people back with our own handwritten letters, because most bands, as they were starting to get some success, they'd print out the one copy and then they'd sign the bottom. We'd still just write the whole letter and, but I think it paid dividends because people are going to stay with us after they got that letter,
Absolutely. To manage merchandise, to do everything. You had to learn all that by trial and error, presumably?
Yeah, no. First time in a band, we're learning, flying by the seat of our pants. We used to have some great times. Our biggest thing as we got out into the touring world, it was when we were coming into touring was right when venues were starting to take the cut of merchandise from bands. And it started because obviously, someone's paying the Stones $1 million to play a stadium and then they're watching them roll out, $5 million in merch. And they wait a minute, we want some of that. But then it trickled down to the club level. And we used to sell our T-shirts for $5. We used to make them ourselves, sell them for $5. And Aerosmith opened a venue called Mamakin, and it was under the guise of giving back to local bands. And the first time we played Mamakin, $5 shirt, they wanted their $1.25, and we were like, what? And so we would always play these venues and try to bolt before we paid the venue cut. And we'd always escape down the street in the van, and inevitably every time someone would go, I left my cymbals or whatever, and we'd have to sheepishly pull back up. And there'd be, the manager would be waiting on the sidewalk with the cymbals and say, did you forget something? So we were always trying to, cut the corners and do it ourselves and do it the small way, you know what I mean?
That sounds like something out of a great movie. The van screeches off and then comes to a halt and just reverses.
Oh, trust me, we've got a lot of those. I often think we could make I've talked about writing a script that was essentially the Bad News Bears of music, that would be us.
So when you think now, I guess, 26, 27 years into the band's career, and you've done it pretty much independent of the music industry. Obviously, you've worked to an extent with certain areas in the industry, but you've run your own race pretty much. What do you think are some of the key decisions or key steps that you took to be able to do that, to be able to survive and not have to play the game?
I think you can never know, if you don't start out doing it yourself in the beginning, you'll never have the wherewithal to either hold on to your rights and power or to take it back. And having done our own label and all that, we always had that. We hated, our pet peeve was listening to people blame their label. It's like, come on, man. Like, that's such a lame excuse, and I'm not saying we were always happy with our label, but we never wanted to blame our label. And so, we did it ourselves, and then we went to an independent, and they were, I still think Epitaph and Hellcat were a respectable independent, and they did a good job, but our biggest problem with them is we were so East Coast and they were so West Coast. And when it came time to make a decision to part ways, we're like, fuck it, let's go back and do it again. Let's do it ourselves again. And then the music world came back. So I always used to make the analogy as, you have the main highway going on the road. And we were always on that little, what they would call in America, 1A. You're on the little road that runs parallel to the highway. It's got potholes and you're going slow. And all the bands were always hoping to get onto the highway, get the major label deal. And we were like, man, fuck that. Let's just stay under the radar and keep cruising down this road. No one's telling us what to do. No one's telling us when we have to tour, what we have to sound like. And we're not giving away huge percentages of what we earn. And everyone wanted to get on that highway, and then all of a sudden the music world changed and everyone wanted to be on the little road. They wanted to direct market to their fans. They wanted to cut out all the overhead. And suddenly we look like geniuses, and truth be told, the highway never wanted us in the first place. You know what I mean? It wasn't like we were telling them to screw. We didn't want to go with them, but they didn't want us either. So it was a very comfortable, just we'll do our thing, you do your thing. And we really never knew any other way, so, but it is interesting how even, very large bands, now they monetize it with meet and greets and that shit, you know what I mean? We played with Aerosmith once and they were charging $2,000, Joe Perry and Steven Tyler, for a photo. And they stood behind a table and they walked the people through, no handshake, no anything. And they took the picture and got a T-shirt and walked through. And it's just different worlds, you know what I mean? No, I'm not trying to shit on them when I say it. I'm just saying, we couldn't look ourselves in the eye if we were charging people money to not even shake their hand. It's just different worlds,
Yeah. Last couple of things, Ken. I just wanted to ask you briefly about, and forgive my pronunciation, the Claddagh Fund? Claddagh Fund.
Yeah.
Right. Which is your, I guess, the band's charity, which you formed in 2009. And if I understand, it sort of looks to help benefit children's charities and veterans charities and alcohol and drug recovery efforts. How do you see the tangible effects of that? That's pretty much when I'm not on tour, what I'm focusing a lot of my time in my life on. We're not just writing a check, we're driving people to detox and to treatment and really kind of hands-on in the community with it.
And I guess like I look at it now as like, I hope that will be the legacy of the band. Maybe that work will continue even when the band isn't, or when the band's not maybe a full-time touring thing. You know what I mean? Or who knows? Look at the Stones, for example. Maybe I'll still be touring when I'm 80. But, you know, I think that's something that will keep the band's name hopefully living on far past our heyday, so to speak. But it's been the really fulfilling side of it. And our fans are the best, man. Like, you know, we have one of our close friends tours and does basically a merchandise stand of Cladifund stuff that 100% of the proceeds, you know, from that go to the foundation. And just the stories he comes back and tells of how much people are willing to give. And, you know, we're not talking about rich guys writing fat checks from corporations. We're talking about people who don't have a lot to give, digging deep and giving money that's going to hurt to give, you know what I mean? And to me, and also people volunteering their time, like our friend that comes on tour, man, he's our friend George Benner, and he dedicates his life to giving back and helping people. And I'm just in awe of, you know, the kind of community it's created around us, which is great because, like I said, you know, music can chew you up and spit you out, and this keeps the whole thing on a higher plane, if that makes any sense. You know what I mean? Like there's a greater good going on, you know?
Definitely. And when you take into account things such as that and what you were just talking about in the way you've steered your career, does it make some of the absurdities of the music industry just seem even more absurd?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the absurdities of the music industry is just, you know, people who unfortunately aren't guided right to handle success and then handle the subsequent failure after the success. And also people, I mean, you know, it is a lifestyle that you can lose yourself in. You know, you're in a different place all the time. And I don't know, man, you know, just everything, just from watching how people sometimes talk to the people. You know, it's that same old thing like your parents or anyone would tell you, hey, how you treat them on the way up, they'll remember you on the way down. And we've got to stand back and see that happen. Like, oh, remember that band and they thought they were hot shits. Look at them now, you know. But we're just, like I said, from such a different planet. I mean, the people that work for our band, it's like family. They've been with us forever. And there's certain people that work for us that if they stop working for us, I'd want to break up the band. You know what I mean? It's like they're that important of a cog. But this is the only band I've ever been in, you know, and this is all I know. So in some ways, a lot of my talk about the music business, I mean, I've been around a lot and I've seen it, but luckily we've been able to not experience a lot of that stuff firsthand. Thank God. You know what I mean? You know, but like I said, a lot of that had to do with the fact that I had made a lot of the mistakes and I had learned a lot of the stuff that I needed to learn in my life before I started playing music. So, it all made music just seem like, you know, this is a piece of cake, you know?
Ken, very last thing, Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people you'd give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
Oh man, you know, in terms of career-wise, you know, first and foremost, our families for letting us take this leap of faith, for sure, you know. Once again, gotta say, repeat myself and say the entire mid-'90s Boston punk scene, because that cog was what catapulted us out, and the rest of it would be the crew and the team that we call family, you know what I mean? And you know, and then obviously those inspirations of, if there was no Joe Strummer, there'd be no Dropkick Murphys. If there was no Jake Burns and Stiff Little Fingers, there'd be no Dropkick Murphys, you know, and just those great inspirational, and, you know, Woody Guthrie, you know, if it wasn't for him, there might not have been a Bob Dylan, and there might not have been a Bruce Springsteen, and there might not have been a Joe Strummer.
Nice. Ken, thanks so much for all your time. It's been really great chatting with you.
Great talking to you, my friend. I appreciate your help, and hopefully do it again soon.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Ken for his time, and thank you for listening. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.